The advancement of technology has allowed a more interactive teaching and learning environment to facilitate effective learning. With massive open online courses, MOOCs in short, they provide a media-rich platform that enhances learners' engagement. Last year was a remarkable year for CityU because of the successful debut of CityU's MOOC in September. Today, we are very honored to have Professor Horace Ip, the lead educator of our upcoming MOOC this April, with us today. Professor Ip is our Vice President in Student Affairs, as well as the Chair Professor of Computer Science at CityU. He was recognized as one of the world's innovators by Time magazine in 2007. He has spent years specializing in interactive media, virtual environment, and e-learning technologies. His research and innovations have won him and his team numerous regional and international awards. Please join me in welcoming Professor Ip to share his talk on immersive learning at CityU, from special education to massive open online courses.
Right, okay. Good afternoon, everyone. Thank you very much for the invitation by Chris and Crusher to give the talk at this year's Canvas Forum. It's always a pleasure to see fellow educators. So today's talk, as introduced, I'll talk about some of the experience we have at CityU about developing immersive learning platforms as well as learning systems. So the MOOC is only a small part of it because the title is from special education to massive online, open online course. So part of my research interest is to see how virtual reality and immersive learning in general applied to students with special education needs. So I'll talk about two examples of such systems. So first of all, I think it's always good to have an understanding of what do we mean by immersive or virtual reality environment. So first of all, one that we are very familiar with is the application in online game or VR game, computer games. In this case, it's not too immersive because when you play a computer game, you're basically looking at the computer. That's why sometimes we call it as like a semi-immersive system. But you do get the sense of immersion by you can actually interact with the virtual object. For example, if the game is about a virtual football, that you are playing a football game or doing penalty kicks, although when you're looking at the screen, you actually see a football pitch. But when you look around, you can still see that you're actually in a sitting room with your wife standing behind you or your kid behind you. So it's not too immersive. But you do get a sense of immersion because you can interact with the virtual object on the screens by playing this game. On the other hand, we have this highly or full immersive system like the 3D movie. When you go to a 3D movie with large panoramic screen, because your focus of vision as well as your peripheral vision are all surrounded by the screen and the virtual environment. So you really feel that you are inside a virtual environment, whatever environment that the movie is depicting, maybe inside an ocean or in Mars and so on. So the sensation it gives you is highly immersive. But for a 3D movie, it's not interactive. You basically just sit there and watch a movie. Another application is in education. An early form of kind of also semi-immersive virtual learning environment is the Second Life. I'm sure Chris is very familiar with it because some years ago, Chris and I, unit, put some money together and bought an island in Second Life. And on that island, we built our virtual classroom. And we invite our students at a certain time all get together in this virtual classroom, either to listen to a lecture or to discuss with each other. Now, the idea of immersion in this kind of environment is that the student actually get a sense that they are going into a virtual classroom and they can see fellow students next to them in the virtual environment, although they are virtual characters. The fellow student, although they are side by side with you in the virtual environment, they may be thousands of miles away somewhere else in another city. And that's the strength about virtual learning environment. They could bring people together in different places, but virtually they are together and they could learn together. Or in entertainment, sometimes you can actually put the learner in a fully immersive, four-wall, stereo display environment. And in that sense, it's really immersive. You can't get more immersive than that, because no matter where you look within that room, you see a 3D projection of a virtual environment. In this case, the student may be learning in the middle of an ocean, learning about the behavior of the ocean fish or animal, and so on. Then we have this skill-based training. So for immersive learning environment, it could put you actually in a virtual golf course, and you could practice your golf swing. A colleague of mine, Dr. Howard Leung, in a computer science department, actually developed such a system for people to learn about dancing, learn about golf. And with motion tracking device, it can actually track your motion as you swing the club, and tell you where it goes wrong in your action by analyzing your motion. And in medical training, actually, the doctor could practice virtual surgery, and they could get a sense that they are actually cutting into the patient's body, because the device they use have some kind of force feedback device to make him feel that he is actually cutting into a physical object, although he is only practicing the surgery virtually. And the last application is psychotherapy. Actually, CityU is one of the pioneers of applying virtual reality immersive environments in psychotherapy in a system called Smart Ambient Therapy for helping children with abuse experience to get over their abuse issues. And in other parts of the world, in particular in the US, a lot of the virtual reality psychotherapy has been used in treating phobia. For example, if you're scared of heights, if you're scared of insects, it put you in a virtual environment full of cockroaches. So when you have seen enough of them, you start building resistance, and when you go back to your room and you see one cockroach, that's nothing. I've seen thousands in the virtual environment, and I can deal with it. And it's all this kind of psychotherapy is really helping the people to build resilience in a safe and controlled environment, and help them how to cope with it. So when they go back to the real world, they have learned this skill, and then they could practice this skill and to cope with the challenge in the real world. Now, all these kind of application really semi-immersive or fully immersive really give the learner some kind of immersive experience, because they make you feel that you are actually practicing something, although you're not actually doing it. You're only doing it virtually. And it gives you the sense that you are actually in another part of the world, when in fact you are sitting in a sofa in your home. So what is the characteristic that give rise to an immersive experience? First of all, what you see has to be highly realistic and authentic, because when you look at the virtual scenery and it doesn't look real, it just like look at a 2D Disney cartoon, you know it's not real, it's not realistic. You don't feel that you are immersed, your presence in a particular environment. So first of all, what you see has to be highly realistic, very authentic. The second characteristic is it has to be interactive, because when you're in the real world, you are always interacting with the people around you, interacting with the objects around you, interacting with the environment around you. So in a virtual environment, it should also be highly interactive. The third thing is it should also be multisensory. Multisensory means it could be 4D. I mean, if you go to Disney, you know when you see a 3D movie, the chair moves, or the chair in front of you has water squirting at you at some point. So these are kind of mixed reality, give you a 4D sensational experience. It's all add to the experience of make you feel that you are actually in a place when you are not. Now, what makes this possible? And there are certain numbers of enabling technology that is available nowadays in order to give us this kind of immersive experience. First of all, realistic. Why computer graphics nowadays is so realistic? If you go to a movie nowadays, in fact, 80% of the movie, many of them are computer graphics, but you don't know because it's so real. You think it's actually looking at the real scenery, but in fact, it's all generated by computer. The reason we are able to do this because of computer graphics technology nowadays, we can build highly detailed graphical models. And with those detailed graphical models, we also have algorithm to paint it in such a way that the color is so real that it's almost like the real things. Like the face here is not real. It's built based on a graphical model of a face. And then we have rendering algorithm that is so real that it's almost look like the real skin tone with the blood vessel running just underneath the skin. It's that realistic nowadays, and the hair and so on. And there are algorithms to synthesize different kind of natural atmospheric condition, like reflection, mist, and so on, haze, and so on. So it's so real that you can, even we cannot tell whether it's real or virtual. And there are also display technology that enable us to see it in 3D. The next is interactive. There are a lot of devices nowadays that enable us to interact with the virtual object in a very natural way without using a mouse or using some kind of device. Things like the Keynote that do motion tracking. So the Keynote will look at you and track your motion, and based on your motion, it will interact with the virtual object in the scene. And there are cyber gloves that it could track very accurately the movement of each of your fingers. Or we can use computer vision technology to track your whole body movement. And all these really help us, enable us to interact with the virtual scenery as if we are interact with the real world by natural gesture. And it has to be very fast because if you want to interact with virtual object, like if you kick a ball, you do the kick motion, and the ball waits 2 seconds before it starts flying off. Now, it's not really weird because it takes time to compute the ball flying off to somewhere else as you kick it. And nowadays, you have very powerful graphic processing unit, GPU, that enable you to generate highly realistic image as 30 frames, 60 frames a second. So the interaction is completely real time. And finally, multi-sensory device that enable you to feel the force when you pick up a virtual object. Actually, you're picking up thin air. But with this kind of haptic device, it can make you actually feel that you are lifting up something heavy. Or when you're pressing into something, it actually has a force feedback that counteract your motion to give you a feeling that you are actually pressing hard onto a solid objects. And all these kind of computer algorithm plus the device plus display technology all contribute to giving us a highly realistic, immersive experience. So when we come to defining virtual reality or immersive experience, clearly we should not define it in terms of what hardware you use. From what I just said so far, I'm sure you realize that for immersive experience, we should define it in terms of human experience of being present in somewhere. So it's all human experience because all the things you see makes you feel or makes you have a sensation that you are actually doing something when in fact you are not. You're only doing it virtually in cyberspace or in a virtual reality. So the definition in virtual reality that we always talk about is the concept of presence. Presence meaning you feel you are present in a situation when you are perhaps miles away from that situation. So what is then when you talk about immersive learning experience? What I say is a characteristic of immersive learning experience is, first of all, when you talk about immersive environment, obviously, first of all, the environment has to be able to provide a very realistic, authentic, or fantastic virtual scenario, a virtual scenery. That's obviously, if you don't even have a virtual scenario, you can't be immersed into it. Because it's learning, those scenarios has to define with respect to certain learning objective or learning outcome in mind. As educators, the first thing we talk about in designing a learning scenario or learning program is what are the learning objectives of this program? What are the learning outcomes we hope to achieve through this learning scenario? So all immersive learning scenario should have some well-defined learning objective and learning outcome. Then it should be the interaction or the instructional design within this immersive environment should be based on certain pedagogical models. Either it's problem-based learning, experiential learning, or game-based learning. So in this case, you may have some games or ways of playing with chemistry, and because it's virtual, you could do experiential learning, doing a lot of trial and error, and if it blow up, it won't hurt you. Or it should be give you stimulating some really interesting learning experience, emotional experience, affective experience. So in this case, a few years ago, we designed an immersive learning scenario in life science, in which we asked a student to pretend to be a hummingbird and flying in a garden looking for food. So the student actually flapping around, standing on a pressure sensor as if a hummingbird. And while he's doing it, during the process, he experienced different kinds of emotion. For example, when you're hungry and you cannot find any flour, you start getting anxious, anxiety. Then you fly harder, right? And when you see the flower, you're flying towards it, you get excited because food is coming. And after you have get to the flower and eat the nectar, you see the energy bar shooting up, you are very satisfied. So during the whole process of learning, you experience different kind of affect state. And all these contribute or enforcing your learning experience. So for any virtual environment, it should be realistic with learning, well-defined learning outcome based on certain pedagogical model, and most important of all, because it's immersive experience, it should evoke various kind of learning effects, emotions. So if we use immersive learning environment, we obviously want to know what are the pedagogical underpinning. How do we know it is an effective learning environment compared with a classroom, compare with web-based learning, or compare with other forms of instructional approach? I would say that immersive learning actually provides a platform to integrate 3 domains of learning, and that's very powerful learning platform. The first learning domain we are talking about, and we all know about it, is the Bloom taxonomy. The Bloom taxonomy actually deals with the cognitive aspect of learning because it defines successive level of knowledge acquisition and utilization in the forms of learning outcomes, successively more sophisticated learning outcome. But that deals with the cognitive aspect. So when you define an immersive learning environment, obviously, maybe the environment is designed to help the student to construct his own knowledge about geometry, about different shapes. And that's a well-defined cognitive knowledge that we hope the student to acquire in that particular learning scenario. And we could do it. The second domain of learning is the psychomotor, which deals with the skill of learning. Now, previously I talked about you could use immersive learning environment to learn about surgery, and that's a skill-based training. You could learn about swinging a golf club, and again, that's skill. You could use it to learn Kung Fu and so on. It's all skill-based learning. And we can also incorporate psychomotor training into a virtual learning environment through interacting with the virtual object. For example, if the learning environment is supposed to teach students about geometry, and that's a cognitive aspect. And in it, we design various kind of interactivity with the object. For example, we have the student to learn how to build a model based on simple geometry blocks. And you do a lot of practice of manipulating different blocks and so on. That's skill-based training, psychomotor training, the use of your coordination and muscle and so on. And that's the psychomotor aspect. And finally, it's the affective domain of learning, which is deal with the attitudes and the learning. And in immersive, because you get highly realistic immersive experience, it can evoke different kinds of learning effect. I just talked about the hummingbird case. You get excited, you get anxious, you get happy, you get curious, and it can even be fear when you talk about to train you to develop resilience for insects and so on. So you first experience fear as part of the learning experience. So immersive learning environment is very effective in stimulating different kinds of effects in the learning. So within a single immersive learning environment, it has cognitive aspect, it has psychomotive aspect because of the interaction, it has the affective aspect of learning because of the experience that you are immersed in the virtual learning scenario. So what I say is, if any good design or criteria for good immersive learning scenario, it should be cognitively challenging because you want to challenge a student intellectual to build its own knowledge, construct its own knowledge. It should be kinesthetically enabling, allow him to interact, to practice psychomotor skill, and as well as effectively stimulating different kind of emotional response as well as attitude as part of the, either as a process of learning or as an outcome of learning. So what follow on is, I give you 3 examples of immersive learning system that I developed over the past 10 years. The first one is called InSport project. As I mentioned before, many people use VR for learning, but my particular interest is to see how virtual reality and immersive learning in particular can be applied to help students with special learning needs. And what can be more challenging to help students who are severe intellectual disabled, SID. By definition, severe intellectual disabled students have an IQ of between 20 and 40, and that's, can you imagine somebody with an IQ of 50? You're sitting here with an IQ over 100, right? So and with this student, anything is a challenge. Even learning to raise their hand is something of a challenge. And in addition, because they have a severe intellectual disability, they also have some other either physical or mental disability, like autism, ADHD, visual impairment, hearing impairment, physical disability, as well as verbal communication issues. So they have a combination of disability and issue. And how do we use immersive learning and virtual reality to help them? And in a special school like this, actually, I work with a school right opposite CityU in Cornwall Street. That's why it's called Cornwall School. And in that school, they already have a lot of special teaching professionals as well as other professionals helping them. For example, in those schools, they have speech therapy to help them with the communication problem. And they also have occupational therapy to help them with the coordination, making use of different kind of muscle, hand-eye coordination, and so on, as well as physical therapy. And they also have different kinds of room for multisensory room in order to develop their other senses, as well as hypersensitivity and so on. So this room, they have colors, they have lightings, and they have different texture in order to stimulate different senses. So with VR, what is our role? How do we use this technology to help them? So for our system is primarily because obviously what we need to help them is not really the cognitive aspect. We hope to help them with the pre-learning skill. What do we mean by pre-learning skill? Curiosity, respond to stimulus, right? You have to be curious before you can start motivate to learn. Your interest in what is in front of you, the learning material in front of you. So that's why the affects is important, learning affects, like curious, to give you motivation to learn. And if you're curious and you find the learning activity interesting, your attention span will be lengthened because you are focusing on what you're learning. You want to find out what's come next, right? And you find interested, so your attention span will be lengthened. And with this student, the attention span is very short because very often they are in their own world. They won't even look at the teacher. They will just, in their own world. And because they also have physical disability, we hope to derive some immersive learning scenario to help them to enhance their body coordination, their visual tracking, the way to balance their body and so on. And we also want to help them some qualitative aspect like self-awareness because many of them are really in their own world. They don't aware of anything around them and they wouldn't understand that what they do will have an effect on the people or the objects around them. And that's self-awareness as well as how to differentiate between things, safe and unsafe, and so on. So in order to do this, as you can see, some of the learning objectives are affective, some of them are psychomotor, and some of them are cognitive. And with this student, we develop 4 areas, as 4-area domain of training for them. First of all, we develop a couple of immersive learning scenario for safety awareness. So with this scenario, they are actually immerse themselves in their own home, and we ask them to differentiate between safe object and unsafe object, a cushion versus a hot iron, a scissor versus a glass of water. And we also have a scenario defining safe and unsafe object in school and so on. So hopefully after they practice it, they know when they're in their home, they know what to touch, what to avoid, and so on. The second one is cause and effects. Cause and effects, because I want them to realize that what they do would have effects in the world around them. And in this scenario, we create some bubbles and balloon, and we encourage them to raise their hand to touch the balloon. And every time they raise their hand, a virtual balloon will burst. When they burst all the balloon, they have succeeded and complete this task. So on the one hand, you train them the raise hand gesture, which is very important because call for attention, call for help, and so on. This is a fundamental gesture. And we use them to play a game and touching a virtual ball, but because of their disability, obviously in the real life, they can't reach out and touch a ball in the air. But with VR, they could do it. And when the ball bursts, a toy will drop down, either a bear or toy car or some cake. So in real world, you can't burst a balloon and then a car drop down because that's magic, right? But in VR, you can do it, and that gets them very excited. And the third one is balance and coordination. It's like they could imagine themselves walking the stone across the river, and they practice their gesture like this. So this is really balancing act. And we have another scenario that they stand on a flying carpet, and they use their body, just simple movement, leaning left, leaning right to steer the flying carpet to fly in a fairyland. And that's something they can never experience in the real world, but with VR, immersive learning, they get very excited because they feel they're standing on a flying carpet, and with simple movement, they can guide the flying carpet flying around in the virtual world. And there are also other sensational scenarios which really stimulate, help them to be calm or give them the experience of swimming under the ocean. So this is 4D. So one of the scenario is that it's a big screen stereo, and we give them the sensation of winter, right? And with winter, obviously, there should be snow. So we have a snow-making machine that we have snow coming down at them when they are immersed in a winter scenery. And there's another scenery is underwater, and we have a bubble-making machine that throw out a lot of bubbles when they're swimming under the ocean. So that's an extra sensational experience with them. And this is what I just talked about, the flying carpet learning scenario. We have a real carpet where the student will stand on it and he will lean his body left and right to drive a virtual carpet which have the same color and texture in the virtual world, and that carpet will fly him over a virtual scenery. So what next is I'll show you a video of how the whole one class operate in that school, starting from beginning of the class. Then they spend some time practicing the skill I talk about in a 3D virtual environment. And most importantly, the question asked is, the skill that you learn in a virtual environment, can they transfer that skill in a classroom environment? And you see, after the virtual environment, they go back to the classroom and try to practice what they learn, the skill they learn in the real world. Let's see. 點樣撳個 video 出嚟啊? I need to go back to the yeah. Okay, right. So okay. Okay, you need to make it full screen. Sorry. Swing control replay and stop. You have to control it here. Okay. All right. So, spacebar. Okay. So this is the beginning of the class. 咦，有冇聲啊？
OK， 咁你哋幾個咧？就跟住我後邊啊，好唔好啊 ？OK， 咁永豪就永豪你幫手熄燈啦，好唔好啊 ？OK， 好，陳志超等埋先，唔好咁急啊，等埋。好啊。熄燈幫手。
So they all have different kinds of disabilities. So first of all, start class, we roll them into this immersive learning room. We actually help the school to build in their own school. It's a special classroom. So this is so the screen the student will see in the lower right corner. So what we did, we encourage them to raise their hand. Every time he raises his hand, a bubble will burst. And when all the bubble burst, there's a really smiling face come out and reward them. So they do it one by one. Well, putting on the glasses is a challenge because they need to put the glass in order to see 3D.
Go.
So sometimes they won't react initially. Right. Then we help them by holding their hand, raise them up, and after a few sessions, they will raise their hands up themselves. Right. After a while, they don't need your hand.
Yeah.
Right. And every time the hand raised, the virtual bubble will burst. And when all the bubble burst, right, very happy. So they take turns. So the students, some students in the waiting area, then they sit in the observation seat before their turn, right? Then they go to the training area, and so on. So when they finish, they go back to the classroom and see whether they could learn the hand raising gesture.
喂，各位同學，頭先咧，我哋啱啱去完邊度啊？去多媒體室咧做完個活動喎，大家頭先做得好唔好啊？好好喎，係咪啊？咁咧，我哋咧而家咧就咧阿 Sir 咧都想有啲糖喺度喎，嗱，邊同學睇下先，哇，喺望下先，哇，有糖喎，哇，好開心啊 ，OK， 好啦，我想問下同學喎，邊個想要糖㗎？
So you can see that they use the hand raising gesture to ask for the sweet or get the attention of the teacher. So we do some pre and post, and the teacher saying that after they do the training, they raise hands more often for this particular part of the training. Yeah, go back to the. Yeah. Yeah. Okay. Right. Okay. So that's the first case. The second one is again. For student with special education, and this time is student with autistic spectral disorder, 自閉症 or autism. In Hong Kong, actually, there are more and more students diagnosed as having autism. In the past, we think it's only a small number, and because of the diagnostic tool is getting better, suddenly it seems actually we have more autistic kids than what we thought 10 years ago. And because of immersive education, inclusive, not immersive, because of inclusive education, these students are actually in a class together with the formal student, with the other student in the same class. And that creates some issue in a normal school setting. So what we do is, again, we have developed some VR training program, hopefully to help them to cope with some of the situation that they commonly encounter in school, in their school life. So hopefully, when they go back to school, they could include or emerge better in their school life. So this is the VR training program to enhance their social, adaptive, and emotion training skill. So for ASD, because it's spectral disorder, it's actually a spectrum. Some ASD students have low functioning and no IQ, and some of them are really high functioning, almost like a genius, and that's the Asperger syndrome. So every student, although they all call autistic kid, but they are somewhere along this spectrum. They're all different because depending on their IQ and their ability and so on. And typically, they have a number of challenges or issues. First of all, social deficit. Because they are not able to recognize emotion, and they may not be able to understand what other people think or interact with their kids, so they are very isolated, and they have challenges in socializing with other school kids. And they have some obsessive behavior, like repetitive behavior, as well as some communication issue. If you look at this kid, they may not be able to recognize the emotion of these images, whether they are fear or anxious or suspicious. When we look at it, we can tell it's suspicious eye. This is an anxious eye, but if you ask an ASD student look at it, they won't be able to differentiate it. And if you use eye tracking to track what they are looking at in a picture, for typical kid, they will look at the eyes of the actor. But for ASD kid, they will try to avoid looking straight at the eyes of the people. In fact, they will look at all over the place, but the eyes. So if you're talking to this kid, you'll find that they try to avoid your eyesight. And they also have some obsessive behavior, always like arrange things from large to small and so on, right? So So what are we trying to do is, again, is a learning objective is to help them to enhance the emotion control, help them to recognize emotion and to make appropriate response, help them to develop some kind of third-party thinking, like empathy, theory of mind, because they are not able to put themselves in the shoes of the others. We also help them to skill about abiding to basic social rule or social norm in normal situation in school. So for that, we built a number of immersive learning scenario. We have a learning scenario like a school library. So he will immerse in a school library setting, and they will do some tasks like finding a book or queuing up to borrow a book out, and in between there may be people jumping queue. Jumping queue really get them freaked out. So we want them to practice. You see people jumping the queue, how to control your own emotion for that kind of situation. And they are tuck shop, right? So they will practice buying food, giving out money, and so on. And the playground, as well as going to school, from getting up in the morning, getting dressed, school bus, and so on. So what we get the feedback from the parents, after they have done the going to school learning scenario, in the morning, going to school, it went very smoothly, right? Because they are practicing in virtual world, so in the daytime, in the real world, they will follow the same procedure. Except that sometimes they look for the thing they see in the virtual scenario that they don't see in their home. So this is the setting we have in our lab. We have some corner where the student will sit and do briefing, debriefing before they go to the immersive learning scenario. And in the lab, we have a four-sided stereo display. It's a cave, so it's fully immersive. You can't get more immersive than this. And the student will be inside, immersing themselves in different kinds of situation and practice the skill that we hope they will develop. And in the session, we have the teacher help them either to review what they have learned last time and to prepare them for the coming lesson. Then they go into the cave to learn about, to practice the skill set in the virtual scenario, and then they go back and to do debriefing. And now let's look at a video again of one of the scenario.
Is it this one?
Yeah. Great, thanks. So this is the sixth scenario we have for different types of situation. And this is the getting to school scene. So this is the cave, four-sided display, fully immersive, with cupboards.
會唔會冇得食早餐㗎？今日有三文治喎。就起身。
So they practice getting up, stop the alarm bell. Then they go to the bathroom, say good morning to your mom, and the mom ignore him. Brush your teeth and changing clothes.
三文治好啦，換衫先，換衫換咗啦，三文治食三文治。係啊，
Go to
好
the
食啊！
sitting room to eat their breakfast. Then get outdoor, put on the shoes.
着鞋啦，我哋着翻運動鞋先。哇，有星星喎落去咁樣。咁知道。
Take the lift down to the lobby
開個新頭車
and
先。
go to the school bus.
哇！樂文係咪最後識翻服？
And take the school bus to the school. And they actually imagine themselves sitting in a school bus with scenery going past them. Then they
21, 22.
that's a classroom scene.
早晨啊！
So when they go to the classroom, they choose the desk they are going to sit in today.
綠色、紅色、紅色、紅色。1、2、3。各位同學早晨。老師早晨。
And it's amazing how these autistic kids are so focused on it. If you have worked with them before, you know their attention span is very short and they get diverted very easily. Right. And we also have a mini game for training emotion recognition.
好，同學，我哋而家落堂啦，起立。 各位同學再見。老師再見。小三仲好過人咧。我邊有一本書入去個10萬個人咯，跟住覺得有啲事。
So this is the tuck shop scenery.
是嗎？做乜仲會買啲出嚟同冇喎，成日先到呢度啦，因為見到學邊間咁。我嗰間唔新，3零。
早晨啊，同學，你今日想買咩嘢食咧？
全部。
You want to eat everything?
拜拜。
So we also have this calming situation because sometimes when they freak out, we switch to this calming situation to calm them down. So that's the effective aspect of the training. So it's spring, summer, autumn, and winter. Okay, so finally, is the last application is the MOOC. It's the latest one that our team has developed, and it's one of the 3 MOOC that CityU developed, and is now online for registration. So if you're interested, you could register to this MOOC later on. And the title of this MOOC is Virtual Hong Kong, New World, Old Tradition. Now, we choose this topic because CityU University of Hong Kong, so what's better, can be better if we do a MOOC on Hong Kong. And the topics for Hong Kong, there are many aspects of Hong Kong we could cover, and we choose to cover, to try to explore how this old tradition that our ancestors who come from different parts of China come to Hong Kong, bring with them various folklore, tradition, and festival, and how they influence the modern life of the people nowadays in Hong Kong, in a financial city, metropolitan city like Hong Kong. So we will explore temple, festival, ritual, practices, and how they transform through the years in a metropolitan city like Hong Kong. And in particular, we hope the student will learn about the Chinese basic concept of the relationship between heaven, earth, and mankind, and how the interaction between man and heaven, and so on, affect the different aspects of our life. So this MOOC is a 3-week MOOC. Week 1 deal with heaven, God, various kind of God, ritual practices, and beliefs. Week 2 deal with earth, ancestor, how we worship the ancestor, the Go Festival, parade, and carnivals in Hong Kong. And the third week is mankind. Because Hong Kong is such a small city, so many people living together in such a small area, how do people deal with the stress that is developed social solidarity by making use of the life like eating in a 大排檔. Actually, it's a very local social solidarity culture and a community. And we don't want our learner, because MOOC people from all over the world, and it's on a PC, right? But we don't want the learner only just read it in a book or read it in a text. We want him to have some immersive experience, so to enable them to feel that they are actually in the middle of a parade, or in the middle of a temple, or in the middle of a 大排檔, and so on. So that's why we have normal video, we have computer animation, and we have 3D panoramic video in this MOOC. Then, because of this MOOC is a multidisciplinary, so the team consists of people from computer science, me and Richard, and we have 2 faculty members from Chinese and History department, and we have people from the School of Creative Media to do the content production. And this MOOC has been presented recently in Rome in an international conference, and because of, it's quite new, MOOC with immersive experience, we won the Best Paper Award and a gold medal. So, what are the technology that we can use to deliver immersive experience through a MOOC setting, right? Distant learning, how do we give them immersive experience? So, obviously, we use stereo images instead of 2D video. And we use 3D panoramic, so you could actually capture the whole environment by 3D panoramic images. How do you look at those 3D images? And luckily now, you have the Google Cardboard, which is very cheap, and everybody can buy in any part of the world. So we help them to set up a Google Cardboard, and we download these 3D images into their mobile phone. They could just look at it and give them immersive experience. And there are different ways to make use of this technology. For example, in the 文武廟 scenario, we have 3D panoramic, and for certain part, we have hotspot that you can click on. When you click on, a 3D model will appear, graphics, standing out in front of you with narrative to explain what it is and perhaps play some sound about the drum and so on. So you are not just looking at it, there are interactivity, but because of the Google Cardboard only have one button, the interactivity is somewhat limited, but again, it helps you to navigate through the temple and to get information from different parts of that temple. And for the cage home is a really small house, I don't know what to call it, home, flat area, yeah, lodging by some local people. And we want the distant learner to experience what is it like in such a small area that they call their home, and what kind of decoration they put in such a home within such a small area. So within it, we have 3D panoramic, and in certain part of the thing, we also have a hotspot, so they could click on, and we explain why in such a small area they still put their ancestor photo in it, their grandfather image in it, and they have a big clock, although small house, they have a big clock hanging in it. What is the meaning of it? How do they interpret, and so on. And for the parade and carnival, we deliberately go to Changzhou for the bun snatching festival, and we take 3D panoramic images for it. And for those who may not be aware of what 3D panoramic, and this is what it is. Cannot open specific, right? We have to play it out then.
Which one? The link, right?
An illustration of a 360 movie. So we have so we take 360-degree movie in a bun slashing, and you could look at it in a different direction, right? Top and bottom, left and right, turn around, look what's at the back at you, and so on. Okay, so, and we do it by some kinds of this device. Okay, and, okay, right, sorry. And this is the device that do the 360 capture, and, whoops, and you can look at it in a 3D 3D video on YouTube. 好可能要 sorry， 哇呢個難控制喎咁樣。
個難啲，我幫你。
唔緊要，唔緊要。full screen 先。And you can. Never mind, it's okay. Yeah. So this is the 360, and actually you can interactively panning left, panning right, up or down, and look at the actual environment. Okay, so now one issue is how do the learner have a smooth transition. For example, when you're doing this MOOC, you'll be reading passages, you'll be looking at a video, and how do we help them to move to a 3D immersive experience? So what we do is we embed a different QR code, either in the text or in the video. So when it comes to the point they want to experience immersive experience, they just take the mobile phone, take a picture of the QR code, and those stereo image will be downloaded to their mobile phone, and they could use the Cardboard Google to look at it. So this is a very smooth transition between conventional content and immersive learning content. So the MOOC is currently exhibited in the library. So if you really want to experience immersive, see all those things you've seen just now, go to the library later on and pick up one of those Google Cardboard and then experience it yourself. In the library, there's also a cave that you can experience what is it like to be inside the Munmo Mill and look around the Munmo Mill and so on. So if you're interested in the course, register in Future Learn. So for the past about an hour, I talked about 3 examples of immersive learning, make use of 3 different platforms. Widescreen stereo display, 4-wall immersive, fully immersive cave stereo display, and the third one using a very simple Google Cardboard device. And I hope it gives you some idea of what we are doing in terms of immersive learning and CityU, and make use of different technology in order to realize and give our students such learning experience. Thank you.